Hey guys, tonight we stumble into the rowdy, rough and tumble world of a medieval inn, where the air's thick with ale fumes, sweaty travelers, and the kind of chaos that makes you check your pockets twice. Picture yourself ducking under a creaky signboard, the inn's torchlight spilling onto a muddy road, as drunken laughter and the clatter of mugs greet you like a punch to the senses. It's not a cozy B&B. This place is a wild mix of shelter, tavern, and questionable life choices. Want to know what really went down inside? You're about to find out. But fair warning, surviving a night in this medieval madhouse might be tougher than you think. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a bustling English town, 1370, where the cobbled street reeks of horse, dung and wood smoke, and the inn, the rusty tankard, squats like a tired beast at the road's end. Mainstream history tells us medieval inns were vital hubs for travelers, merchants, pilgrims, rogues offering food, beds, and ale, but they were often cramped, filthy, and teeming with shady characters. You push through the heavy oak door, and the common room hits you. A haze of pipe smoke, the sour tang of spilled ale, and a din of voices arguing, laughing, and haggling. A grizzled innkeeper, eyes you from behind a scarred counter, his apron stained with grease. You're handed a rough wool cloak standard for guests to blend in, and it smells like it's been through a few too many nights here. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some inn patrons believed tossing a coin into the hearth brought good luck for their journey, thinking it appeased road spirits. You glance at the fire. No coins sparkling, and smirk unless the spirit of bad hygiene counts. Historians still argue whether inns were lively social centers or dangerous dens, with some saying they fostered community, while others point to frequent thefts and brawls. You're leaning toward dens. A shifty-looking traveler in the corner is already sizing up your coin pouch. You sidestep a spilled mug, the floor sticky under your boots, and feel the inn's pulse-part refuge. Part circus. You're starting to see why this place was a traveler's lifeline, but also a gamble. You think of modern motels' clean sheets, maybe a vending machine, and almost laugh. This is survival, medieval style. Joke number 1. If this inn was on TripAdvisor, it'd get 1 star for vibes. But bring your own soap. The room's warmth, from a smoky hearth, battles the chill seeping through the walls. And you spot a mix of guests, merchants counting coins, a pilgrim clutching a rosary, a bard tuning a lute. You're curious about their stories, but Watts Glare says pay up or move on. You're impressed by the inn's chaotic energy, but wary. Every laugh feels like it could turn into a fight. You're starting to get the vibe inns were where the road's dramas played out, for better or worse. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like crashing at a dive bar with a motel attached and hoping your wallet survives. The hearth's glow flickers, but there's a story in every sticky floorboard, and you're ready to dive deeper. Joke number 2. If this was a reality show, it'd be in insanity. Who gets robbed first? You're still in the chaotic common room of the rusty tankard, the smoky haze of ale and pipe smoke stinging your eyes. The innkeeper Watt's gruff voice barking orders as you clutch the itchy wool cloak. Its musty smell a reminder of the inn's gritty welcome. The hearth's flicker offers a thin warmth, and you're here to sleep in the inn's grim, shared quarters, where cramped beds and scratchy straw make rest a medieval gamble. Mainstream history tells us medieval inn bedrooms were often overcrowded, with travelers, strangers, or not piling into shared pallets or benches. The straw mattresses crawling with fleas and worse, offering little comfort or privacy. You're following a serving maid, Agnes, up a creaky staircase, her candle casting jittery shadows on the damp walls as she leads you to the sleeping chamber. The air's thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and moldy straw, and your boots stick to the floorboards. The distant tavern din laughter, a lute's twang fading as you brace for a rough night. Agnes points to a lumpy straw pallet crammed against a wall, already occupied by a snoring merchant and a pilgrim muttering prayers. You're supposed to squeeze in, and the straws poking through a threadbare sheet, looking more like a nest than a bed. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some guests believed sleeping with a sprig of lavender under their pillow warded off night spirits and lice, a hopeful charm against the bed's creepy crawlies. You check the pallet, no lavender in sight, and smirk unless the spirit of itchiness is on duty. Historians still argue whether shared beds were a practical necessity or a health hazard, with some saying they maximized space in busy inns, while others point to disease spread by fleas and close quarters. You're leaning toward hazard. The merchant's snores are wet, and you're pretty sure that's a flea on your arm. You try lying down, the straw jabbing your back, and the pilgrim's elbow digs into your side. Cozy's not the word. You think back to Watt's wary glare in the common room, setting the inn's rough tone, and see these beds as a gritty extension of that chaos shelter. Sure, but at a cost. The stakes are high. A bad night's sleep could leave you groggy for the road, and fleas might carry worse than itchiness in plague-prone times. You notice Agnes tucking a rag under her apron, probably to fend off the same pests, her face etched with exhaustion. You're impressed by her resilience but uneasy. This palay's a petri dish, and you're not thrilled to be the experiment. You recall the road spirits coin-tossing from the hearth, and wonder if lavender's just another desperate hope. You're starting to see why inn beds were a last resort, why rest here was more survival than relaxation. You're tempted to sleep on the floor, but it's stickier than the bed. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like crashing on a hostile bunk with mystery stains and praying for no bedbugs. The chamber's chill seeps in, but there's a story in every scratchy straw, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 1. If this bed was a hotel review, it'd be great for fleas. 0 stars for sleep. The candle's glow wanes. The snores and creaks a restless lullaby. And you think of modern mattresses' memory foam. Clean sheet sand almost laugh. This is medieval lodging, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why shared beds were the norm. Why every guest was a reluctant roommate. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like squeezing into a packed airbin with strangers. And no Wi-Fi. The palay's itch intensifies. But there's a story in every restless toss, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If this was a sleep app, it'd track hours of scratching instead of REM cycles. You're still in the grim sleeping chamber of the rusty tankard, the straw palay's itchy embrace, and the merchant's wet snores keeping sleep at bay. The faint glow of Agnes's candle long gone, as you pick straw from your wool cloak. Its musty stench now joined by the chamber's sour funk. The distant tavern din filters up the creaky stairs, and you're here to taste the inn's questionable kitchen fare, where greasy stew and stale bread make medieval dining a risky affair. Mainstream history tells us, in kitchens served simple, cheap meal stews, porridges, and bread often made from leftover scraps or low-quality ingredients, with hygiene as spotty as the service, leading to frequent upset stomachs. You're stumbling down to the common room, the air thick with ale fumes and hearth smoke, where Agnes, the serving maid, plunks a wooden bowl of grayish stew and a hunk of rock-hard bread before you on a scarred table. The stew's surface glistens with fat, and the bread speckled with suspicious green spots, making your stomach lurch as you sit among rowdy travelers. You dip a spoon into the stew, its broth murky with bits of gristle and wilted cabbage, the taste like boiled regret, with a hint of rancid lard. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some inn patrons believe stirring their stew counterclockwise chased away ill spirits, a superstition thought to ward off foodborne curses. You give the bowl a half-hearted swirl, no spirits fleeing, and smirk unless the spirit of indigestion's already moved in. Historians still argue whether in food was a practical necessity or a health gamble, with some saying it fueled travelers on tight budgets, while others point to frequent illnesses tied to spoiled ingredients. You're leaning toward gamble. The stew's greasy film and the bread's moldy crust scream. Eat at your own risk. You nibble the bread, its texture like chewing a brick, and your jaw protests, definitely not fresh baked. You think back to the flea-ridden pallet upstairs, another grim piece of the inn's rough hospitality, and see this meal as its culinary cousin, cheap, filling, but a digestive lottery. The stakes are high. A bad bowl could leave you doubled over on the road, and medieval remedies were more prayer than Pepto. You notice a pilgrim beside you, slurping the stew with a grimace but no complaints, his rosary clinking as if praying for his gut. You're impressed by his fortitude but queasy. Hunger's clearly a stronger motivator than caution. You try another spoonful, hoping for a less offensive bite, but the gristle crunches ominously, and you discreetly push the bowl aside when Agnes isn't looking. You're starting to see why in food was a traveler's necessity, and why it was a roll of the dice wrapped in broth. You're tempted to ask for ale to wash it down, but the mugs look as grimy as the stew. Joke number 1. If this stew was a Yelp review, it'd be 1 star for warmth, 0 for not haunting my dreams. You shift on the bench. The common room's chaos shouts, clinking mugs, a dog's bark swirling around you, the hearth's smoky warmth a thin shield against the drafty chill. You think of modern diners, greasy but regulated, and almost laugh. This is medieval cuisine, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why guests ate this junk, why a full belly trumped a safe one. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like grabbing a questionable burger from a roadside stand and hoping it stays down. The stew's greasy sheen glints, but there's a story in every dubious spoonful, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If this bread was a workout, it'd be Jaw CrossFit, Moldy Crunch Edition. You're still in the smoky common room of the rusty tankard, the greasy stew's rancid aftertaste clinging to your tongue like a bad memory. Its bowl pushed aside on the scarred table as you brush crumbs from your wool cloak. The moldy breads, grit still stuck in your teeth. The hearth's smoky warmth battles the drafty chill, and you're here to join the raucous revelry in the inn's tavern, where drunken songs and rowdy cheer turn the night into a medieval party gone wild. Mainstream history tells us medieval inn taverns were social heartbeats, where travelers, merchants, pilgrims, rogues drank ale, sang bawdy songs, and swapped stories, often spiraling into chaos as the night wore on, with ale fueling both camaraderie and conflict. You're squeezed onto a bench, the air thick with sour ale fumes and sweat, as a red-faced bard named Giles strums a lute, leading a slurred chorus about a knight's misadventures. Your mug of cloudy ale sloshes as a drunken laborer bumps you, and your senses are reeling from the noise, shouts, laughter, and off-key singing that fills the packed room. You take a sip of the ale. It's bitter, yeasty tang cutting through the stew's grease, but it's warm and tastes like it's been sitting since last week. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tavern-goers believed singing louder honored the ale's spirit, thinking it made the drink stronger and luckier for the road. You join in a half-hearted huzzah for Giles's song, no luckier for it, and smirk unless the spirit of hangovers is taking notes. Historians still argue whether tavern revelry was a vital release or a dangerous spark, with some saying it built bonds among strangers, while others point to frequent brawls and thefts, fueled by drunken excess. You're leaning towards spark, the laborers swaying dangerously close to a merchant's coin pouch, and the mood feels like it could tip into a fight. You clutch your mug, trying to blend in, but the ale's warmth is making your head fuzzy, and you're not sure you're cut out for medieval karaoke. You think back to the grim stew, another risky part of the inn's rough charm, and see the tavern's revelry as it's louder. Drunker cousin fun until it isn't. The stakes are high. Too much ale could leave you vulnerable to pickpockets or worse, and the inn's no place for a clear head. You notice Agnes, the serving maid, weaving through the crowd with a tray of mugs, her eyes sharp as she dodges a groping hand. You're impressed by her grit but wary. This room's a powder keg, and every song's a match. You recall the flea-ridden pallet upstairs, proof the inn's comforts come with a catch, and wonder if the ale's spirit is just another way to justify bad choices. You're starting to see why taverns were the inn's heart, and why their chaos was a double-edged sword. You're tempted to belt out a verse to fit in, but your singing's more likely to start a riot than win friends. Joke number 1. If this tavern was a karaoke bar, it'd be body ballads. Slur your way to regret. You shift on the bench. The room's noise lute strums, clinking mugs, a slurred argument swirling like a drunken storm. You think of modern bars' neon lights, clean glasses and almost laugh. This is medieval nightlife, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why revelry ruled the tavern, why every song was a fleeting escape from the road. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like downing cheap beer at a dive bar and butchering Sweet Caroline with strangers. The hearth's glow flickers, but there's a story in every slurred note, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If Giles's lute was on Spotify, his playlist would be medieval bangers, guaranteed to spill your ale. You're still in the rowdy common room of the rusty tankard, the tavern's drunken chorus led by Giles's lute ringing in your ears, the bitter tang of warm ale coating your tongue as you nudge the mug aside. Your will cloak damp with spilled drink and hearth smoke. The air's thick with sweat and sour fumes, and you're here to hear the wild, exaggerated tales spun by road-weary travelers. Stories that blend truth, lies, and medieval bravado to entertain the inn's raucous crowd. Mainstream history tells us inns were storytelling hubs, where pilgrims, merchants, and rogues swapped tales of adventure, miracles, or monsters, often inflating their exploits to win free ale or impress listeners, making the tavern a stage for oral tradition. You're squeezed on the bench, the hearth's smoky glow casting shadows as a weathered pilgrim, Brother Edmund, stands, his rosary clinking, launching into a yarn about outwitting a forest bandit with a holy relic. The room quiets, mugs pausing mid-sip, and you lean in, caught between skepticism and the story's pull. Your head still fuzzy from the ale. Edmund's tale grows wilder. He claims the relic, a saint's toe bone, glowed and scared the bandit, witless, earning him safe passage. The crowd roars, some cheering, others scoffing, but they toss him bread anyway. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some travelers believed telling a bold story under a tavern's roof bound the road's luck, thinking it ensured safe travels, like a charm against mishaps. You glance at the rafters, no luck sparkling, and smirking less. The charms for free snacks. Historians still argue whether these tales were mere entertainment or cultural glue, with some saying they shared knowledge and bonded strangers, while others think they were mostly boasts to dodge paying for drinks. You're leaning toward boasts. Edmund's grin as he pockets the bread says he's milking this relic story for all it's worth. You try clapping along, but your hands are sticky from ale, and you're not sure if you buy the glowing toe bone bit. You think back to the tavern's drunken songs, a louder echo of this storytelling chaos, and see these tales as the inn's heartbeat fueling laughter, suspicion, and fleeting camaraderie. The stakes are high. A dull story could get you booed, while a good one, like Edmund's, earns you a meal or a bed. You notice a merchant across the table, rolling his eyes but tossing Edmund a coin. Maybe he's heard this one before. You're impressed by the pilgrim's showmanship but wary. Half the room's probably spinning lies, and your coin pouch feels vulnerable. You recall the moldy stew from the kitchen, proof the inn's gifts come with a catch, and wonder if these tales are just another kind of hustle. You're starting to see why stories were the tavern's currency, why every wild yarn was a bid for attention or survival. You're tempted to share a tale maybe about outsmarting a flea upstairs, but your fuzzy head says, stick to listening. Joke number 1. If Edmund's story was a novel, it'd be Holy Toes and Bandit Woes, a medieval bestseller. You shift, the bench creaking under you, the room's din lute strums, shouts, a dropped mug swirling like a tipsy whirlwind. You think of modern bars open midnights, exaggerated Tinder bios, and almost laugh. This is medieval networking, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why tales ruled the tavern, why every lie was a spark in the gloom. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like posting a viral X thread about fighting off a bear with a selfie stick. The hearths glow, dims, but there's a story in every boastful yarn, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If this tavern was a podcast, it'd be True Lies, road stories with zero fact-checking. You're still in the smoky common room of the rusty tankard, Brother Edmund's wild tale about the glowing saint's toe bones still ringing in your ears. The crowd's laughter and skeptical jeers fading as you sip the last of your cloudy ale, its bitter dregs matching the gritty feel of your wool cloak, now speckled with stew crumbs and tavern grime. The hearth's smoky glow casts a flickering warmth, and you're here to haggle with the innkeeper. What? A shrewd operator whose cunning bargains shaped the inn's rough hospitality. Mainstream history tells us medieval innkeepers were notorious for sharp dealing, charging travelers for everything: beds, meals, even stable space, often inflating prices or shortchanging guests to maximize profit. In a cutthroat trade, you're weaving through the crowded room, dodging a swaying laborer, to reach Watt at his counter, where he's counting copper coins with a hawk's eye, his grease-stained apron stretched tight over a belly that's seen plenty of his own ale. The air's thick with sour fumes and the clatter of mugs, and your coin pouch feels lighter already as you brace for a negotiation. That's more battle than banter. You ask for a private bed hoping to escape the flea-ridden pallet upstairs, but Watt smirks, naming a price that could buy a week's bread. You counter, offering half, and he leans in, his breath reeking of onions, suggesting you share a bench for less. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some innkeepers believed slipping a pebble into a guest's ale ensured they'd pay without fuss, thinking it bound their purse to the inn's luck. You eye your empty mug. No pebbles in sight. and smirking less the lux for Watt's wallet. Historians still argue whether innkeepers' haggling was savvy business or outright exploitation, with some saying it kept inns afloat in tough times, while others think it preyed on weary travelers with nowhere else to go. You're leaning toward exploitation. Watts grin as he ups the price again, says he's milking your road-worn state. You toss a few coins, hoping for a decent pallet, but his nod feels like a warning you're getting what you paid for, and it won't be luxury. You think back to Edmund's boastful tale, another in hustle for free bread, and see Watts haggling, as the tavern's sharper edge every deal a test of wits, with travelers like you at a disadvantage. The stakes are high, overpay, and you're broke for the road, underpay, and you're sleeping in the stables with the rats. You notice Agnes, the serving maid, hauling a tray of mugs, her eyes flicking to Watt with a mix of respect and wariness. She's probably haggled with him for her wages. You're impressed by her endurance but uneasy. This inn's a gauntlet, and Watt's the gatekeeper. You recall the moldy stew and its risky bite, proof the inn's offerings come with strings, and wonder if the purse-binding pebble's just another trick to keep you spending. You're starting to see why haggling was the inn's lifeblood, why every coin was a hard-fought victory or loss. You're tempted to push for a better deal, but Watt's meaty hand on his ledger says he's done bargaining. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like arguing with a shady motel clerk over a deluxe room that's all stains and no Wi-Fi. The common room's din lute strums. Slurred shouts swirls around you, but there's a story in every haggled coin, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 1. If Watt's counter was a game show, it'd be Deal or No Deal. Medieval Ripoff Edition. The hearth's glow wanes, the air heavy with ale and greed, and you think of modern hospitality, clear prices, online reviews, and almost laugh. This is medieval lodging, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why innkeepers ruled the roost, why every bargain was a power play. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like haggling with an Uber driver over surge pricing and losing. The tavern's chaos pulses, but there's a story in every coin's clink, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If Watt was on Shark Tank, he'd pitch the rusty tankard, where your wallet checks in, but doesn't check out. You're still in the bustling common room of the rusty tankard. Watt's shrewd haggle for a better lumpy pallet you're already dreading still stinging, as you clutch your lightened coin pouch, the wool cloak's ale-soaked weight dragging on your shoulders. The hearth's smoky glow flickers, and you're here to dodge pickpockets and thieves lurking in the inn's crowded shadows. A constant threat that made medieval taverns as dangerous as they were lively. Mainstream history tells us inns were notorious for petty crime, with thieves and cut purses blending into the drunken throng, preying on travelers' coin pouches, gear, or even cloaks, especially in dimly lit corners where ale dulled wits. You're weaving through the packed room, the air thick with sour ale fumes and sweat, trying to keep your pouch close as a shifty-eyed rogue, Jack, brushes past, his grin to sly for comfort. The din of lute strums, slurred songs, and clinking mugs masks the soft jingle of coins, and your senses are on edge after Watt's wallet-draining deal. But you're determined to keep your few remaining coppers safe. Jack lingers near a table, his fingers twitching as he eyes a merchant's bulging pouch, and you spot another figure, a hooded woman, in the corner watching the crowd like a hawk. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some inn patrons believe tying a knot in their cloak trapped thieves' luck, a superstition thought to foil pickpockets by binding their fingers. You fumble with your cloak, no knot in sight, and smirk unless the thief's luck is tripping over drunkards. Historians still argue whether thefts were opportunistic or organized, with some saying lone rogues worked the crowd, while others think gangs colluded with innkeepers like Watt to split the take. You're leaning toward organized. Jack's quick glance at Watt suggests a nod, like they're in on the game. You tuck your pouch deeper under your tunic, but Jack's already circling closer. His hand grazing your elbow, you swerve, heart racing, and he melts into the crowd. You think back to Watt's cunning bargain, a financial pickpocketing of its own, and see actual thieves as the inn's darker shadow, turning every corner into a test of vigilance. The stakes are high. Losing your coins could strand you on the road, with no bed or bread to your name, and medieval justice was more likely to flog than refund. You notice Agnes, the serving maid, slipping through the throng, her tray steady, but her eyes darting. She's probably dodged a few sticky fingers herself. You're impressed by her street smarts but jittery. This room's a minefield, and your pouch is a target. You recall the body songs from the tavern's revelry, a distraction that thieves like Jack thrive on, and wonder if the thief-trapping knot's just another hopeless charm. You're starting to see why inns were a pickpocket's playground, why every guest was a mark in this chaotic game. You're tempted to call out Jack's sneaky move, but his lean frame says he's faster than you, and Watt's watching like he's taking bets. Joke number 1. If Jack was a magician, his best trick would be now you see your coins. Now you don't. You shift, the bench creaking, the room's chaos shouts, a dropped mug, a lute's twang swirling like a tipsy storm. You think of modern bars, bouncers, card payments, and almost laugh. This is medieval nightlife, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why thieves thrived here, why every shadow hit a hustle. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like dodging a scammer at a sketchy club who accidentally grabs your wallet. The hearth's glow dims, but there's a story in every sly glance, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If this inn was a board game, it'd be Monopoly. Steal the pouch, skip the bed. You're still in the crowded common room of the rusty tankard, your coin pouch tucked tightly under your wool cloak after dodging Jack's sneaky fingers. The tavern's smoky haze and ale fumes swirling as the hearth's flicker casts jittery shadows. The din of drunken songs and clinking mugs hums in the background. And you're here to meet the women who run this chaotic inn, their hidden grit keeping the place afloat despite the thieves and rowdy guests. Mainstream history tells us women in medieval inns serving maids, cooks, or innkeepers' wives were vital to daily operations, handling everything from serving ale to cleaning rooms, often outworking their male counterparts while facing harassment or dismissal as mere help. You're watching Agnes, the serving maid, weave through the throng with a tray of mugs, her sharp eyes catching a spilled coin before a thief like Jack can snatch it. The air's thick with sweat and sour ale, and your stomach's still uneasy from the moldy stew, but you're drawn to Agnes's quiet strength, a contrast to Watt's loud haggling from the counter. Agnes sets down her tray, wiping her brow, and you catch her muttering to a cook, Ellen, who's stirring a cauldron of that greasy broth you choked down earlier. Ellen's hands, red from scalding water, move with practiced speed, and she snaps at a drunk pawing her apron. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some in women believed braiding a sprig of rosemary into their hair warded off lecherous spirits, a charm thought to deter unwanted advances from rowdy patrons. You notice Agnes's braid, no rosemary in sight, and smirk. Her sharp tongue's probably charm enough. Historians still argue whether women's roles in inns were empowered or exploited, with some saying they wielded real influence over guests and trade, while others think they were overworked, underpaid, and undervalued. You're leaning toward exploited. Agnes's quick dodge of a groping hand and Ellen's curt nod to Watt suggest they're juggling chaos. For scraps of respect. You offered to carry a mug to help, but Agnes waves you off her tray's a balancing act, and you're no match for her skill. You think back to Jack's thieving shadow, a threat these women navigate daily, and see their work as the inn's unseen engine keeping beds filled, mugs poured, and fights at bay. The stakes are high. A slip, like spilling ale on a surly merchant, could mean a docked wage or worse, a brawl. You notice a third woman, Meg, scrubbing tables, her apron soaked as she mutters about Watt's stingy pay. You're impressed by their endurance but uneasy. This tavern's a gauntlet, and they're running it with no applause. You recall the bawdy songs and Edmund's tall tales, distractions that rely on women like Agnes to keep the room spinning, and wonder if the lecherous spirit's charm is just a wish for a quieter shift. You're starting to see why women were the inn's backbone, why their grit held this chaos together. You're tempted to ask Ellen if she's ever spiked Watt's stew for revenge, but her steely glance says she's too busy for gossip. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like waitresses ruling a dive bar with sass and no tips. The common room's din lute strums, slurred shout swirls around you, but there's a story in every hurried step, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 1. If Agnes was a superhero, she'd be Tray Warden, mistress of mugs and shade. The hearth's glow wanes, the air heavy with ale and toil, and you think of modern service jobs, fair wages, break rooms, and almost laugh. This is medieval hospitality, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why women kept the inn alive, why their work was its pulse. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like baristas running a Starbucks during a rush with zero backup. The tavern's chaos pulses, but there's a story in every tray's balance, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If Ellen's cauldron was a cooking show, it'd be chopped to scraps, no hazard pay. You're still in the smoky common room of the rusty tankard, Agnes's swift tray dodging and Ellen's cauldron stirring grit lingering in your mind. The tavern's chaos of shouts and lute strums swirling as you brush ale-soaked crumbs from your wool cloak, its weight heavy with the inn's grime. The hearth's flickering glow casts a hazy warmth, and you're here to explore the smelly, animal-filled stables, the muddy yard where travelers' horses and the inn's livestock create a noisy, pungent sanctuary that's as vital as the tavern itself. Mainstream history tells us medieval inn stables were essential for housing guests' horses, mules, and sometimes even oxen, but they were filthy, crowded, and reeking of manure, serving as both a practical hub and a chaotic extension of the inn's rough hospitality. You're following a stable hand, Tom, out a side door into the yard, your boots sinking into the churned mud as the sharp tang of horse dung and wet straw hits you like a wall. The air's cold, laced with the distant market sour ale, and your stomach's still uneasy from the stew's rancid bite. But you're curious about this overlooked corner of the inn's world. Tom, a weary lad with straw in his hair, tosses hay into a stall where a merchant's horse snorts, its breath clouding in the dusk. The yard's a mess, muddy ruts, scattered feed, and a pen of bleeding goats, but it's alive with purpose. Horses whinnying and a mule kicking its gait. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some stable hands believed sprinkling salt in a horse's stall kept night hags from spooking the animals, a superstition thought to ensure safe travels. You eye the muddy ground, no salt in sight, and smirk unless the hag's scared of stink. Historians still argue whether stables were efficient operations or neglected necessities, with some saying they were well run to protect valuable livestock, while others point to their filth as a breeding ground for disease. You're leaning toward neglected, a pile of rotting straw in the corner, and the goat's scrawny frame suggests Tom's stretched thin. You try tossing a handful of hay, but it scatters, and Tom snorts. Your stable hand skills are as good as your tavern singing. You think back to Agnes's tireless work in the common room, keeping the inn's chaos in check, and see the stables as another unsung cog, vital for travelers but ignored until a horse goes lame. The stakes are high. A sick animal could strand a merchant, and a filthy stable might spark illness that spreads to the inn plagues always a whisper away. You notice a pilgrim's mule, its saddlebags bulging, and spot Jack, the thief from earlier, lingering near the stalls, his eyes on the bags. You're impressed by Tom's quick shout, scaring Jack off, but uneasy. This yard's as much a target as the tavern. You recall the moldy bread and Watt's sharp haggling, proof the inn's comforts come with risks, and wonder if the night hag charm is just a stable hand's hope for a quiet shift. You're starting to see why stables were the inn's smelly heart, why their muck was a traveler's lifeline. You're tempted to ask Tom if he's seen a hag, but his grunt as he mucks a stall says he's too busy for folklore. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like parking your car in a sketchy lot and praying it's there in the morning. The yard's chill bites, but there's a story in every whinny, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 1. If this stable was a airbin, it'd be rustic retreat, free manure, BYO shovel. The torchlight wanes, the air heavy with dung and frost, and you think of modern garages clean, secure, and almost laugh. This is medieval parking, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why stables mattered, why their mess kept the inn moving. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like a valet lot where your car gets a free mud bath. The animals' snorts echo, but there's a story in every muddy hoof print, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If Tom was a zookeeper, he'd list Manure Maestro as his top skill on LinkedIn. You're trudging back from the smelly stables of the rusty tankard, the tang of horse dung and wet straw still clinging to your boots. The stable hand Tom's grunt as he mucked stalls, echoing in your mind as you re-enter the inn's smoky common room. Your wool cloak heavy with mud and ale stains. The hearth's flickering glow battles the drafty chill, and you're here to witness the brawls that erupt downstairs, where ale-fueled tempers and old grudges turn the tavern into a medieval fight club. Mainstream history tells us medieval inns were notorious for drunken fights, often sparked by disputes over money, insults, or women, with the tavern's mix of strangers and cheap ale creating a volatile brew that could end in bruises. Or worse, you're squeezing onto a bench, the air thick with sour ale fumes and sweat, as a shout cuts through the lute strumming a burly merchant, red-faced from drink, accuses a weary laborer of cheating at dice. The room tenses, mugs pausing mid-sip, and your heart races as you grip your coin pouch, still wary from Jack's thieving shadow. The merchant lurches forward, swinging a meaty fist, and the laborer ducks, toppling a table with a crash that sends ale mugs flying. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tavern-goers believed spilling ale during a fight appeased the brawl spirits, thinking it cooled tempers by honoring unseen forces. You eye the spilled ale pooling on the floor, no spirits calming anything, and smirk unless the spirit of chaos is running the show. Historians still argue whether in brawls were spontaneous outbursts or fueled by deeper tensions, with some saying they were just drunken antics, while others point to social divides, merchants versus laborers, locals versus travelers as the real spark. You're leaning toward tensions. The merchant's sneer at the laborer's ragged tunic screams class grudge, not just bad dice. You duck as a mug sails past, narrowly missing your head. and realize this isn't your scene. You're more about sipping than scrapping. You think back to the stable's muddy order, where Tom kept animals in line, and see the tavern's brawls as its wilder counterpart. A chaos Agnes and Ellen navigate with steely grit. The stakes are high. A bad fight could wreck the inn, scare off guests, or worse, draw the town watch, who aren't known for gentle arrests. You notice Watt, the innkeeper, watching from his counter, his arms crossed but not intervening. Maybe he's betting on the winner, or just glad it's not his furniture breaking. You're impressed by his calm but rattled. A stray fist could catch you, and your coin pouch is still a thief's target. You recall the pilgrim's tall tale about the saint's toe bone, a distraction that kept the room laughing, and wish for one now to cool this mess. You're starting to see why brawls were the inn's dark pulse, why ale and egos made every night a gamble. You're tempted to shout for peace, but the laborer's tackling the merchant to the floor, and you'd rather not be collateral damage. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like a bar fight over a spilled craft beer breaking out on Yelp reviews. The common room's din grunts, cheers, a loot snap swirls like a storm. But there's a story in every flying fist, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 1. If this brawl was a sport, it'd be ale-foo, the art of drunken dukes. You shift, the bench creaking, the room's chaos a drunken whirlwind as Watt finally bellows for order. Though no one listens, you think of modern bar security cams, quick bouncers, and almost laugh. This is medieval nightlife, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why fights flared here, why the tavern was a powder keg of pride and pints. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like a TikTok video of a club scuffle going viral with #BarBrawl vibes. The hearth's glow dims, but there's a story in every bruised knuckle, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If Watt refereed this fight, he'd sell tickets and call it Tankard Takedown. Round 1. You're still in the chaotic common room of the rusty tankard, the brawl's aftermath: spilled ale, a broken mug, and the merchant nursing a bruised jaw settling uneasily as Watt's bellows finally scatter the fighters. Your wool cloak now, speckled with fresh ale from a wayward splash. The hearth's smoky glow flickers, and you're here to see how the medieval church kept a stern eye on the inn's sinners, policing vices like drunkenness, gambling, and lust that thrived in this rowdy tavern. Mainstream history tells us the church wielded immense power in medieval towns, with priests and local clergy regularly patrolling inns to curb immoral behavior, imposing fines, penances, or public shaming to enforce Christian virtues, though their efforts often clashed with the tavern's freewheeling spirit. You're perched on a creaky bench, the air thick with sour ale fumes and sweat, when a gaunt priest, Father Baldwin, sweeps in, his black robe stark against the tavern's grime, his eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk hunting wayward souls. Your heart skips, still jittery from the brawl, as you tuck your coin pouch deeper. Wary of both thieves and holy judgment, Baldwin's gaze lands on a dice game in the corner, where a laborer and a pilgrim wager coins, and he booms a warning about Satan's lures, clutching a wooden cross. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some priests believed sprinkling holy water on a tavern's threshold trapped sinful urges, thinking it kept vice from spilling into the street. You glance at the door. No water glistening, and smirk unless Satan's a fan of bad ale. Historians still argue whether the church's policing was effective moral control or a feudal power grab, with some saying it curbed excess, while others think it just drove sinners to sneakier vices. You're leaning toward feudal, The dice players pocket their coins but wink at each other. Baldwin's sermon isn't stopping there. Game. You shift, keeping your mug low, hoping not to catch his eye. You're no saint, but you'd rather avoid a lecture on your half-drunk ale. You think back to the brawl's raw tension, a spark the church would surely condemn, and see Father Baldwin's presence as another layer of the inn's push and pull revelry versus restraint, ale versus atonement. The stakes are high. A public shaming or fine could ruin a traveler's reputation, and the church's reach means nowhere's safe, not even the rusty tankard. You notice Agnes, the serving maid, slipping past Baldwin with a tray, her face neutral, but her pace quick. She's probably dodged his sermons before. You're impressed by her stealth but uneasy. This room's a tightrope, balancing fun and fear of divine wrath. You recall Watt's sharp haggling and Jack's thieving, proof the inn thrives on bending rules, and wonder if the holy water charm is just a priest's wish for control. You're starting to see why the church haunted taverns, why their gaze was as sharp as a thief's dagger. You're tempted to ask Baldwin if he's ever tried the inn's stew, sinful in its own right, but his cross-waving says he's not here for banter. Joke number 1. If Baldwin ran this tavern, it'd be the holy tankard. All ale, no fun. You shift, the bench groaning, the room's din lute strums, hushed bets, a cough softening under Baldwin's glare, though the dice players are already sneaking another roll. You think of modern bars, ID checks, last call, and almost laugh. This is medieval nightlife, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why priests patrolled here, why every sin was a battle for souls. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like a health inspector crashing a club to lecture about overpouring. The hearth's glow dims, but there's a story in every stern glance, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If the church had a tavern app, it'd be Sin Tracker. Log your vices. Get a penance. You're still in the smoky common room of the rusty tankard. Father Baldwin's stern sermon on sinful dice games still hanging in the air like a storm cloud, his black robe a fading shadow as he sweeps out, leaving the tavern's din lute strums, slurred laughs to creep back in. Your wool cloaks damp with ale and grime, and you're here to overhear the merchants' deals whispered in the inn's corners, where trade talk shapes the tavern's pulse as much as its brawls or songs. Mainstream history tells us medieval inns were bustling trade hubs, where merchants struck deals over ale, bartering goods, negotiating prices, or planning routes. Their hushed talks weaving the economic web that kept towns like this alive. You're easing into a dim corner, the hearth's glow barely reaching as you settle near to merchants. Hugh and Simon, their velvet caps and bulging coin pouches marking them as men of means. The air's thick with sour ale fumes and the faint tang of ink from Hugh's ledger, and your senses are sharp after dodging Baldwin's holy glare. But you're curious about the deals fueling this chaotic inn. Hugh leans in, his voice low, offering Simon a batch of Flemish wool for a steep price, while Simon counters with a deal for York's iron tools, their words a tangle of numbers and promises. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some merchants believed sealing a deal with a shared ale mug bound the pack's luck, thinking it ensured honest trade by honoring tavern spirits. You eye their mugs, untouched, and smirk unless the spirit of bad breaths running the show. Historians still argue whether in deals were the backbone of medieval trade or a risky gamble, with some saying they drove economic growth, while others point to frequent disputes or cheated terms sparking feuds. You're leaning toward gamble. Hugh's sly glance at Simon's pouch suggests he's inflating the wool's worth, and Simon's squint says he's not fooled. You shift closer, pretending to sip your stale ale, but your coin pouch light from Watt's haggling keeps you grounded. You're no merchant, just an eavesdropper. You think back to Baldwin's moral crackdown, a clash of control in this freewheeling tavern, and see these deals as another layer of the inn's tension: profit versus trust, whispers versus brawls. The stakes are high. A bad deal could bankrupt a merchant, disrupt trade routes, or even fuel a feud like the one that sparked the tavern's recent fistfight. You notice Agnes, the serving maid, gliding past with a tray, her ear cocked toward the merchant. She's probably heard enough deals to know who's cheating. You're impressed by her quiet savvy but wary. This corner's a chessboard, and every word's a move. You recall Jack's thieving fingers and the stable's muddy risks, proof the inn's a gauntlet of hustles, and wonder if the pack's luck mug sharing is just a merchant's hope for a fair shake. You're starting to see why trade talk was the inn's lifeblood, why every deal was a high-stakes game. You're tempted to ask Hugh if he sold any wormy wool, but his sharp glance says outsiders aren't welcome in this game. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like overhearing Crypto Brothers negotiate a shady NFT deal in a dive bar. The common room's din clinking coins, a lute twang swirls around you. But there's a story in every whispered bargain, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 1. If Yu's deal was a pitch, it'd be Shark Tank. Wool edition. No refunds. The hearth's glow softens, the air heavy with ale and ambition, and you think of modern cafes, laptops, deal closing, handshakes, and almost laugh. This is medieval commerce, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why merchants ruled the inn's corners, why every trade was a tavern's heartbeat. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like sealing a startup deal over IPAs and hoping the other guy's not a scammer. The ledger's ink glints, but there's a story in every haggled price, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If Simon's pouch was a Venmo, it'd say pending. Don't trust. Use wool. You're still tucked in the dim corner of the rusty tankard's common room. The merchant's hushed wool and iron deal fading as Hugh and Simon clink mugs, sealing their pact with a wary glance, the ink's faint tang from their ledger lingering. In the air, your wool cloaks heavy with ale stains and stable mud. And you're here to endure the brutal chill of a winter night in this drafty medieval inn, where freezing temperatures test the grit of every guest, from merchants to rogues. Mainstream history tells us medieval inns were notoriously cold in winter, their thin walls and smoky hearths offering little defense against icy drafts, forcing travelers to bundle up, share body heat, or rely on meager fires that often did more to choke than warm. You're shifting away from the corner. The hearth's glow now a pitiful flicker, as Watt, the innkeeper, tosses a single log onto the fire, its crackle barely denting the frost creeping through the shuttered windows. The air's thick with sour ale fumes, sweat, and a new bite of cold that makes your breath cloud, and your stomach settled since the stew's grim assault. But you're bracing for a night where warmth is as scarce as a clean bed. You pull your cloak tighter, its damp wool doing little to stop the chill, and notice the crowd huddling closer to the hearth, their faces pinched as the wind howls outside, rattling the inn's timbers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some guests believed rubbing their hands with ashes from the hearth stole fire's spirit, thinking it kept them warmer through the night. A charm as desperate as it was sooty. You eye the ash pile, no fiery spirits in sight, and smirk unless the spirit of frostbite's on duty. Historians still argue whether winter's hardship in inns unified guests or deepened divides, with some saying shared suffering built camaraderie, while others point to fights over fire space as proof of selfish survival. You're leaning toward divides. A burly laborer elbows a pilgrim to claim a spot by the hearth, and the pilgrim's muttered curse suggests no one's sharing tonight. You try inching closer to the fire, but the laborer's glare and the smoke stings send you back. Your frozen fingers will have to wait. You think back to the merchant's deal, a warm flicker of trade in this icy chaos, and see winter's chill as another test of the inn's rough hospitality. Like the brawls or thieves' shadows, the stakes are high. A cold night could sicken you, and medieval inns weren't exactly stocked with hot toddies or spare blankets. You notice Agnes, the serving maid, hauling a basket of kindling, her hands red from the cold she's probably used to watch stingy logs. You're impressed by her endurance but shivering. This tavern's a freezer, and the hearth's more tease than comfort. You recall the flea-ridden pallet upstairs, proof the inn's cozy comes with a catch, and wonder if the fire's spirit ash rubbing is just a guest's plea for relief. You're starting to see why winter made inns a trial, why every spark was a hard-won prize. You're tempted to barter with Watt for more wood, but his scowl from the counter says you lose that fight. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like cranking a space heater in a cheap motel only to find it blows cold air. The common room's din coughs, grumbles. A lute's faint pluck swirls like a frosty storm. But there's a story in every chattering tooth, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 1. If this hearth was a dating app, it'd be Tinder. Sparks fly, but no heat. The shutters rattle, the chill sinking deeper into your bones. And you think of modern hotels' thermostats, fluffy duvets, and almost laugh. This is medieval lodging, with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why winter tested the inn's grit, why every guest fought for warmth. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like camping in a blizzard with a single blanket and calling it adventure. The fire's glow fades, but there's a story in every frozen breath, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If Watt's fire was a weather app, it'd forecast eternal shiver. 100% chance of frost. You're still shivering in the common room of the rusty tankard, the winter chill seeping through the inn's flimsy walls, the hearth's pitiful glow barely warming your frozen fingers. As you pull your ale-stained wool cloak tighter, the laborer's greedy claim to the fire still stinging. The air's heavy with sour ale fumes, sweat, and frost's sharp bite. And you're here to listen to minstrel songs, their tales and tunes of fleeting light against the tavern's gloom, weaving stories that lift the spirits of weary travelers. Mainstream history tells us minstrels were vital in medieval inns, roaming bards who sang of knights, lovers, or mythical beasts. Their performances blending entertainment with news, often softening the inn's harsh edges with music and laughter. You're easing onto a creaky bench, the room's din coughs, grumbles, clinking mugs hushing as a weary minstrel, Cedric, strums a lute, his voice rising with a ballad about a dragon-slaying hero. The hearth's smoke stings your eyes, but your heart lifts with the melody, a welcome reprieve from the cold and the brawl's lingering tension. Cedric's song paints a knight battling a fire-breathing beast, his lute's chords weaving danger and triumph, the crowd leaning in, some chuckling, others wide-eyed. He slips in a tidbit about a local lord's failed harvest, masking news as verse to dodge Watt's glare. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some minstrels believed playing under a waxing moon strengthened their strings, thinking it made songs more enchanting, a charm for tips and safe roads. You glance at the shuttered window, no moon tonight, and smirk. Cedric's charm is all talent, no lunar boost. Historians still argue whether minstrels were mere performers or cultural linchpins, with some saying their songs were just tavern fluff, while others think they carried vital news and preserved oral history. You're leaning toward linchpins. Cedric's sly harvest jab has the merchants whispering, and his ballads got even the grumpy laborer tapping his foot. You clap along, your hands thought enough to keep rhythm, but your ale-soaked cloak sticks to the bench. Medieval concerts come with a side of grime. You think back to winter's brutal chill, a test of endurance that made in a frozen gauntlet, and see Cedric's songs as a warm spark, kindling hope where fires failed. The stakes are high. A dull performance could bore the crowd, cutting tips and leaving Cedric hungry, but a good one, like this, earns coins and maybe a bed. You notice Agnes, the serving maid, pausing her tray to listen, her tired face softening. She's probably heard 100 bards but still sways to the tune. You're impressed by Cedric's knack for holding this motley crew, but wary. His lordly gossip could stir trouble, like the brawl's merchant-laborer grudge. You recall Brother Edmund's tall tale of the Saint's Toe Bone, another tavern story that won bread, and wonder if Cedric's dragon is just as stretched. You're starting to see why minstrels were the inn's soul, why their songs were a lifeline in the gloom. You're tempted to toss Cedric a coin, but your pouch light from Watt's haggling says hold off. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like a busker on a subway platform nailing a cover and raking in Venmo tips. The common room's din lute chords, cheers, a dropped coin swirls like a smoky dream. But there's a story in every plucked string, and you're ready to keep goin'. Joke number 1. If Cedric's lute was a playlist, it'd be dragon jams, medieval hits to thaw your soul. The hearth's glow wanes, the chill creeping back, and you think of modern gigs, Spotify, cozy venues, and almost laugh. This is medieval entertainment with a side of survival roulette. You're starting to get why minstrels lit up the inn, why every note was a spark against the cold. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like a TikTok singer going viral with a medieval vibe check. The tavern's hum softens, but there's a story in every soaring verse, and you're ready to keep going. Joke number 2. If Cedric was on X, he tweets slayed a dragon in song. Still waiting on that ale tip. Hashtag bard life. You're still in the smoky common room of the rusty tankard. Cedric's dragon-slaying ballad fading into a soft hum. Its warmth lingering like a fleeting dream as the crowd's cheers quiet. Your will cloak heavy with ale, mud, and the inn's gritty chaos. The hearth's embers glow faintly, casting long shadows. And you're here to reflect on the wild, vibrant life of this medieval inn as winter's chill eases and dawn's light hints at spring's approach. Its legacy a tapestry of stories, struggles, and fleeting joys. Mainstream history tells us inns like the rusty tankard were microcosms of medieval life, hubs of trade, tale-telling, and survival, where strangers mingled, deals were struck, and the road's hardships found temporary shelter, leaving echoes in modern pubs and motels. You're leaning against a worn pillar, the room quieter now as travelers slump over mugs or stumble upstairs to flea-ridden pallets. The air softer with the scent of cooling embers and a faint whiff of spring's wet earth through the shutters. Your coin pouch, light from Watt's haggling, grounds you. But you feel the weight of this place's unruly heart, a pulse that's carried you through its chaos. You glance at Agnes, wiping tables with a rag, her face etched with the night's labor, and Cedric, packing his loot, his coin pile modest but earned. The inn's legacy lives in their grit, in Watt's sharp deals, in the merchant's whispered trades, each a thread in a story of endurance and hustle. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some innkeepers believed closing the tavern at dawn freed the night's spirits, a ritual thought to cleanse the space for new guests. Like a medieval reset button, you eye the shutters, dawn's glow creeping in, and smirk. Those spirits must be as tired as you. Historians still argue whether inns were vital community anchors or fleeting waypoints, with some saying they shaped social bonds, while others think their chaos was too transient to leave a lasting mark. You're leaning toward anchors. The faces here, Agnes, Tom, even Jack the thief, form a rough family, tied by this tavern's creaky walls. You trace the pillar's scarred wood. It's not just a silent record of nights like this, and feel a strange fondness for the inn's messy soul. You think back to Cedric's songs, the brawl's fury, the stable's stink, each a piece of the rusty tankard's wild mosaic, woven through winter's cold and the church's glare. The stakes were high. Every deal, song, or stolen coin was a bid to survive, and this inn held it all together, a haven and a hazard. You recall Father Baldwin's sermons, trying to tame the tavern's vices, and marvel at how its spirit outlasted his cross. The room's air feels lighter now, spring's promise thawing the frost, a sign the road ahead might be kinder. You're impressed by the inn's legacy, not just in sheltering travelers but in sparking stories that echo beyond its walls. You're tempted to carve your initials into the pillar, a nod to this night, but your knife's dull. And what's watching? You're starting to see why inns were medieval lifelines, why their chaos left a mark on time. You smirk, picturing a modern equivalent, like a dive bar's neon glow holding a city's secrets. Its jukebox, the bard of the night. The embers fade, and you're ready to let this world drift, its lessons as lasting as dawn's first light. Wind down, you're resting now. The common room melting into a gentle haze, the tavern's din softening to a whisper. The weight of ale, mugs, muddy stables, and whispered deals dissolves, leaving only the murmur of spring and the calm of a road unfolding. You're safe here, wrapped in the quiet of a place that sheltered souls, its legacy glowing like embers in your mind. Let your breathing slow, each exhale long and unhurried, your body sinking into the pillar's steady embrace. The stories of Agnes, Cedric, and their raucous nights linger, but they're distant now, blending into the dawn's tender light. You don't need to hold them. The inn's chill fades, the air grows still, and you're drifting, carried by a peace as steady as spring's return. Sleep's waiting, gentle and sure, ready to cradle you like a traveler's hope for home. Close your eyes, let go, and rest.